reached into his pocket and began counting out some notes. Then a small boy appeared, no more than 5 years old, a child who had slipped from his mother for just a moment in the crowd. He wandered directly in front of Iyalajo. He looked down at the old woman on her mat and he began to scream. Not the crying of a lost or hungry child, deep, body-shaking, terrified screaming, the kind that comes from seeing something that adults have learned to ignore. He pointed at her with a trembling finger and could not stop. His mother came running, scooped him up, and for the first time truly looked at the old woman, not with a hurried glance, not with pity, but really looked. She felt something cold move through her that she could not name. She backed away quickly, holding her son tightly, and kept walking without a word. Mr. Olarinwoju put his money back in his pocket and walked away fast. Then Fumi, the jewelry seller nearby, suddenly remembered something. 3 years ago, she had given Iyalajo money, and that very same week, her best customer had stopped buying from her and her sales had collapsed. She had never connected the two things, until now. She opened her mouth and the words came out, first to the woman beside her, then louder because truth has a way of getting louder once it starts moving. More voices joined. A trader, a mother, a young man who remembered his brother's story. The crowd thickened. And then Paadisa stepped forward. Paadisa was 80 years old, 40 years in Molete, a man whose words people waited for before they decided what to believe. He stood straight and spoke clearly. I have watched this woman since 1998. I have seen what she does. I said nothing because I was afraid, but I am 80 years old and I do not have time left to be afraid. I am telling you today, this woman is not what she appears to be. She is a destroyer. The crowd erupted. Years of quiet suffering, years of whispered suspicion, years of telling themselves it was coincidence. It all poured out at once. And then in the middle of all that noise, something happened that silenced everyone. Iyalajo's face changed. Not the way a face changes with emotion. Deeper than that. The mask of suffering she had worn for 20 years slipped, just for a few seconds, and what showed underneath was something cold and composed, something that had never once truly suffered, something that had for a very long time been perfectly satisfied with itself. People nearest her stepped back. Some turned and ran. Others dropped to their knees and prayed. Iyalajo, for the first time in 20 years, was fully and completely seen. In the days and weeks that followed the exposure at Molete, something quietly wonderful spread across Ibadan. Those who had been destroyed by Iyalajo began to bounce back. Baba Remi, who had lost his shop and spent years struggling, borrowing money, living with shame, received a visit from a new supplier, offering full stock on generous credit terms. He reopened his shop. Within months, it was fuller and busier than it had ever been, even in his best days before the destruction. Mama Tunde, who had lost 3 pregnancies and cried more tears than she believed a person could cry, became pregnant again. This time, the doctors were amazed at how strong everything was from the very first checkup. She carried that pregnancy all 9 months and delivered a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named the child Grace. Kunle received a call from a different company in Lagos, a better company, higher salary, more senior position. He took it and never looked back. Mrs. Adeyemi's business recovered steadily, her customers returning one by one. Biodun retook his WAEC examinations and passed with grades so high that his school held him up as an example for younger students. Not every recovery was instant. For some, it took months of patient, hard-working faith before things truly turned around. But the direction had changed, and that change in direction was everything. It was as if a heavy stone had been lifted from the mouth of a well, and the water that had always been there could finally rise freely to the surface. People said it was the grace of God, and they were right. When darkness is exposed and removed, the light it was suppressing has room to live again. The blessings had always been there. They had simply been blocked. Now, the blockage was gone. When people tried to celebrate Deji as a hero, he would look uncomfortable and shake his head. He kept saying, "I did not do anything special. I just did what I always do. I gave with God's name on it, that is all." And that, slowly, was what Ibadan understood to be the whole lesson. It was never about being special. It was about being consistent, about covering even the smallest, most ordinary moments with prayer, a habit so quiet it seemed like nothing until the day it became everything. The community did not go to the police. They did not take the matter to any court. What Iyalajo had done could not be handled in an ordinary courtroom. The damage had been done in the spirit, even though its consequences were felt very much in the flesh. This was a matter for the community itself. So they gathered, as Ibadan people know how to do. Elders, pastors, imams, and community leaders met and reached the same conclusion without much argument, that Iyalajo could no longer live among them. A public meeting was held on a Saturday morning at the open space near the bus stop, the very spot where she had sat for over 2 decades. She came without being dragged. She knew the game was over. The mask had slipped and everyone had seen what was underneath. There was nowhere left to hide. One by one, people stood and spoke. Babaremi described watching 10 years of work disappear in 3 months. Mama Tunde stood before the gathering with her baby daughter, Little Grace, tied to her back, and in a calm, clear voice, described 3 pregnancies lost. 3 times hope had been taken from her. Kunle came down from Lagos to speak. Fumi spoke. Students, traders, mothers, fathers, they testified for over 2 hours, and the weight of all those stories together was enormous. Iyalajo sat in the center of it all and said nothing. Her dark eyes were flat and empty, like a fire that had gone completely cold. The power that lived behind those eyes for 20 years was gone. Broken first by one young man's quiet prayer, drained further by truth spoken openly, and finished entirely by a whole community standing together and refusing to be afraid any longer. When the last person sat down, Pa Adisa rose slowly to his feet. The crowd went silent. He looked at Iyalajo for a long moment, then spoke the final word of judgment in a voice as steady as old wood. "You are not welcome here. You came among us and took from people who gave you kindness. You took their businesses, their children, their futures. You turned mercy into a weapon. There is no longer any place for you in this city. Go and do not come back." 2 young men from the community escorted her out of Molete that same day. She went. Some said they saw her near Ojo on the edge of the city. Others said towards Oyo, but she left Ibadan and never returned. Without the community she had fed on for so long, she had nothing. The darkness that powered her was broken, and wherever she went now, whatever market she sat in front of, whatever bus station she tried, people walked past without stopping, without looking, without giving. It was as if an invisible mark had been placed on her that strangers could sense without understanding. Even people who had never heard her story would feel a strange unease and quicken their steps as they passed her. She moved from place to place, growing genuinely thin now, genuinely hungry, genuinely alone. She had no family, no friendships built on anything real, no life outside the darkness she had chosen decades ago. And the darkness was gone. About 2 years after leaving Ibadan, a woman in a small town outside the city said she saw her sitting at a roadside. She looked empty, the woman said quietly, like a lamp that had completely run out of oil. 3 years after the banishment, word came back to Molete through quiet channels, the way serious news always travels, that Iyalajo was dead. Nobody could say exactly where or exactly how. No funeral that anyone attended, no grave that anyone could point to. She slipped out of the world as quietly and as anonymously as she had once sat on her mat watching the people of Ibadan pass by. Nobody mourned her. But when the news reached Molete, people felt something. Not happiness, not triumph, but the deep, quiet relief of a long and grey season finally coming to an end. The feeling of a window opened after years in a closed room. Something heavy had lifted from the air. Ibadan could breathe again.
Years passed. Ibadan moved on as great and living cities always do. The market stayed noisy, the motorcycles kept weaving, the smell of amala kept rising in the evenings. New children were born, new traders set up their shops, new young people arrived with new dreams. Life moved forward, as it must. But the story of Iyalajo, the beggar of Ibadan, did not die with her. Mothers told it to their daughters while braiding their hair in the evenings. Fathers told it to their sons over meals. Traders passed it to younger traders just finding their feet. It moved from mouth to ear, from one generation to the next, kept alive because the lesson it carried was too important to let go. And every person who told the story was always careful to say the same thing first. Do not stop helping the poor. That was not the lesson, not even close. The poor must be helped. Kindness must never die in a person's heart. A generous heart is a blessed heart. The world desperately needs people who still give. The lesson, the real lesson, was about how you give. It was about what you carry in your heart when your hand reaches out. Because a gift given carelessly, without faith, without covering, can be intercepted. But a gift attached to prayer, a gift given with God's name on it, is protected. No darkness can reach what grace has already covered. When people asked Sis Bisi what had made Deji different from all the others, she would stop what she was doing, put down whatever was in her hands, and give the question the full answer it deserved. It was not that Deji was more powerful. It was not that he prayed longer prayers or was a more important person. He had a habit he never broke, not even for a small, ordinary Tuesday morning moment on his way to work. He covered everything with prayer, everything, even 100 naira. And that covering was the wall that she could not cross. And when she hit that wall, something broke in her that had never broken before. That one ordinary man's quiet, consistent habit started the end of 20 years of darkness. The businesses of those who had been ruined kept growing, year by year, steadily. The children born to the women who had suffered kept coming into the world healthy and full of life. The opportunities that had been stolen came back in new and sometimes even better forms. And from all of it, Ibadan carried 3 truths forward. Truths that Iyalajo herself, without ever intending to, had proven with her own life and death. The first truth: not everything that looks broken on the outside is broken on the inside. A pitiful appearance is not always the whole story. Ask God for discernment, the wisdom to see what the eye alone cannot show you. The second truth: evil cannot hide forever. It may operate for a long season, longer than seems fair, but the light always comes. Truth always finds its way out. No darkness in this world can build a permanent home. The exposure always comes. The third and greatest truth: give. Always give. Let your heart remain generous and open, but cover your giving with prayer. Attach God's name to every act of kindness that leaves your hands, no matter how small, no matter how ordinary the moment feels. Because a covered kindness is not just a kind act, it is a powerful act. And no force of darkness that exists in this world or the next can lay a finger on what grace has already covered. If you passed through Mole today and stopped at the old corner near the bus stop, you would see nothing unusual, just the road and the traffic and the people moving with their loads and their dreams. But sometimes, if you stood there long enough, you might notice an older resident pause at that particular spot. They would look for a quiet moment at the empty ground where a worn mat once lay. They would shake their heads slowly, almost to themselves, and then they would walk on, with something that looked almost like gratitude written across their face. Some things a city does not forget. Some lessons stay in a place the way a scar stays on the skin, always visible to those who know where to look. A mark of something survived, a reminder of how far grace can reach and how much one praying heart can change. The beggar of Ibadan was gone, and the people of Ibadan were free.
Subscribe for more interesting stories.